Mark chapter 5. We'll be there shortly. And I'm not sure how long this one's going to last because the battery's already flashing, but that's okay. Should have checked it before I got up here. Good evening.
Good evening.
Oh, come on. The Olympics are going on. Good evening. That's better. By the way, we need a new medal. Anybody else with me? Anybody else see the ladies' road race today? The bike race? Anybody else see the ladies' road race? I'm still hurting from that, okay? So painful. Led the whole leg of the race, and 3 people chase her down, and she comes in 4th. Are you helping me with the batteries? Thank you, bro. Great, thank you. We have been spending moments with the Master on Sunday evenings. And Mark 5, and some of you, wait a minute, we were in Mark 5 last week. We were. But we're looking at one of the other episodes in Mark 5. As I reminded you last week, we're going to look at a tearful moment here in a minute. In Mark chapter 5, this thing's going to work too, there are several things going on in Mark 5. I'm going to get there in a minute. I know this is not working, but everything's kind of working on me here. Let's see. Go ahead and advance that a couple of times. It's bring with impossible cases. Go ahead and throw up the 3 that are in there. The demonic man, the diseased woman, and the dead girl. And when you think, we kind of looked at 2 of those last week. We looked at the poor guy running around naked in the graveyard. I mean, you're having a really bad day when you don't know that. And he didn't. And he's all over the graveyard, and everybody else knows that about him and understands the struggle that he's having, but he doesn't know that. So it's kind of a unique situation. It's horrible when everything is really bad in your life and you don't know it. Well, unfortunately, the second lady, and that's the one we focused on last week, was the diseased woman. She realized, I'm bleeding, nobody can find out why. And I've been to doctor after doctor, and I've exhausted everything. And finally, she reaches out, touches the hem of Jesus' garment, and it's the only episode of healing we read about in the scriptures where Jesus doesn't actively participate, but his power goes out of him. He realizes that, and we looked at that last week. But the reason I want to look back at this next situation is you find out first in the opening verses in Matthew 5 about the tragedy that is getting ready to occur in this family's life. I want to share one tragedy with you, and it's going to mean a little bit more when we sing the invitation song. In 1871, a tragedy occurred in Chicago, a fire that ravaged the city. When it was finally extinguished, the fire had taken over 300 lives and had left some 100,000 people homeless. A man by the name of Horatio Gates Spafford was one of those who tried to help the people of the city get back on its feet. He was a Chicago lawyer who had invested heavily in the downtown area, lost everything as a result of the fire, but more tragically, he also suffered the loss of his only son just a year earlier. Still, for 2 years, he assisted the homeless, impoverished, and grief-stricken others ruined by the fire. After about 2 years of that work, Spafford and his family decided to take a vacation. They were to go to England to join 2 individuals on an evangelistic crusade, travel to Europe. He was delayed on his business, but he sent his family on ahead. He would catch up to them on the other side of the Atlantic. Their ship, the Villa de Havre, never made it. Off Newfoundland, it collided with an English sailing ship, the Lockheed, and sank within 20 minutes. His wife, Anna, was able to cling to a piece of floating wreckage, one of only 47 survivors among the hundreds. Their 4 daughters, Maggie, Tanetta, Annie, and Bessie, were lost at sea. He received a telegram from his wife with only 2 words: saved alone. He boarded the next available ship to be near his grieving wife. When the ship passed near the spot where his daughters had passed, he goes back to shore and pens the words, when peace like a river. It is well with my soul. How do you get from ultimate loss to glorifying God? In the journey that Jairus' daughter has in the text that we look at, we mentioned this last week, Jesus is more than able. There is no impossible situation with him. When you think of verses 21 through 23, there's an incredible, pitiful dialogue that happens with Jairus. See, in verse 22 in chapter 5, here's what we read. Now, when Jesus had crossed over, and again by boat, and gathered to him, he was there, and behold, the ruler of the synagogue came, Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet. Here is a ruler of the Jewish synagogue who comes and falls at the feet of Jesus. Now that in and of itself is a total violation of everything that's been going on in Jairus' life. In fact, when Jesus comes on the scene, he's been told, or all the Sanhedrin's been told, all the Jewish rulers have been told, we got to watch this guy like a hawk. We've got to make sure that everything he's doing, and here's Jairus. Why in the world would he do this? Why would one of the rulers of the synagogue fall at the feet of his? Because his attitude is one of humility. And in verse 23 it says, he begs him earnestly, my little daughter lies at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her that she may be healed and she will live. Now this is an individual who has been told Jesus is an imposter. He's making claims that are not legitimate. What causes you, when your occupation, your whole world is about doing what you're supposed to do on your job, and yet your little girl is sick? We've had our various journeys here as a congregation, and we all know, whether it is your child, your sister, all of a sudden, if it's your wife, your husband, all of a sudden, whatever's going on in your world takes second place to what's going on in your loved one's life. All of a sudden, it didn't really matter who you are. All of a sudden, it's just about whatever they need, whatever you can do to take care of the situation that they're in. And here, Jairus has forgotten the fact that he's one of the rulers of the synagogue. Right now, he's just the father of a daughter who is so very ill. And when you make this kind of appeal, you come to Jesus and you share this. And my little daughter lies at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her. So Jesus went with him. Now, how at that moment, how do you think Jairus is feeling? We've got, when you finally figure out I'm going to get some help, and we're headed that way. And then you have the episode that occurs in the middle. There's a painful delay. I've been in those moments when somebody said, we'll have the results in a week. Some of you have been there. I remember several years ago, when I ended up at Duke, when I first moved here, and all the tests that were run and all the situations, I'd never been sick a day in my life. I had my tonsils out when I was 12, and I don't really even remember that. I think I just had it because I was up like the next day because they gave me ice cream. Thought this is the coolest thing in the world. I come home, I get all the ice cream I want. Now, not that we didn't have ice cream, we just didn't have all the ice cream we wanted until after I had my tonsils out, and then it was, anything I wanted, and that was pretty cool. And then when I moved here, and I had that where I'd have these tremendous headaches, and I remember going through that process, and that kind of changed. But I can remember, we'd run a test, and I thought, even then, and I know that was back in the day, but even then, I thought, well, you've run a test, somebody's looked at it, surely somebody's got information. Right? And I know we have those same feelings. Sometimes somebody runs a test and it's automatic. Well, the painful delay is in the interest. Jesus responded, but he went with him, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him. And now a certain woman, that this whole, from verses 25 all the way over to verse 34 is about the woman. Now here's where I want to... We don't have anything talking about Jairus, but if you're the father of the daughter who's at the point of death. What do you think about the events that are occurring right now? Jesus. What do you mean somebody touched? I mean, I don't know what he said. I mean, I know with everything going on, we talked about it last week, they're thronging around. There's this crowd. If there's ever a time Jairus doesn't want anybody to be around but him and Jesus, this is that time. Just to get rid of the crowd. He didn't say that. But Jesus enters as an intrusion of sickness. I want to ask you a question. Jairus didn't know the woman who touched Jesus. He didn't know any of these individuals that are thronging around him. But I'm going to ask you just one. Who at this moment in time, I don't care how sick, I don't care if lepers walk up, I don't care if invalids walk up that are blind, that have never seen, that individuals that can't hear, individuals that are struggling to walk. Jairus has a daughter at the house. How important do you think these individuals are to Jairus? Now, some of you are saying, well, he should be but you're sitting in the church. I'm talking about, I want you to step outside of the building for a minute. Your daughter is dying. You've got Jesus headed your way. Other people are stopping him. Now, there's nothing in the text about this. I'm taking some license here. I just want you to feel the pain, the angst of what happens when other situations get in the way of what you're trying to do for the one that you care about. This is the intrusion. It's sickness. It's legitimate concerns. It's legitimate struggles. And doesn't that happen in our world? You can have one thing that's really going bad, and all of a sudden something else occurs, and you go, really? Don't I have enough to deal with? Why do I have to deal with this too? Why am I not? And Jesus is headed that way. Well, and there's an interesting thing that occurs, the invasion of sorrow. In verse 35, while he was still speaking, some came from the ruler of the synagogue's house who said, the words he did not want to hear, his greatest fear when he left the house to go get Jesus. Your daughter's dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? I don't know what he must have felt at that moment, but I got a fairly decent idea. Probably the greatest sense of remorse he had felt since he had become the ruler of the synagogue or dealt with anybody, any individuals. His daughter. It doesn't say it's his only daughter. His daughter's dead. He had made every effort. He'd gone to get the only person he knew could do anything about it. But even with his best efforts, she's gone. We can get sometimes into situations, and many of us have been in those situations even with our best efforts, even with our best investigation, even with our best, even with everything that we have. We may invest money, we may invest time, we may invest all sorts of things and say, I want to do everything within my power to fix this, and we can't. And it kind of goes all the way back to the moment I shared with you last week. It was the woman, she had spent all of her money. She had exhausted every one of the resources that she had, and here it finally got to the point that she knew all I've got to do is touch Jesus. All I got to do is get to Jesus, but Jesus has got to get to my house. Now, there are other episodes where Jesus heals at a distance. For whatever reason, Jesus chooses, and knowing, but see, the really neat thing at this moment is in verse 35 or verse 36. As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, do not be afraid. Only believe. Something really powerful is about to happen. Jesus does it more than once, but it's a way that he does it that I find very interesting. If you'll notice in the initial verse, there's an exclamation of faith that Jesus himself says, do not be afraid, only believe. It took courage and faith for the ruler of the synagogue to come to Jesus in the first place. To fall down at his feet is a sign of humility to an individual whom he's been informed you're not supposed to even be doing anything for this individual. We're supposed to just be watching him and monitoring his activity. His daughter. Doesn't matter. I'll do whatever it takes. But how do you believe now? How do you have faith when you've just gotten word, verified word, your daughter's dead? Nothing anybody can do. Don't bother Jesus anymore. But then I wonder, again, the text doesn't say this. But I've been in way too many situations like this. I've been in situations where individuals have died suddenly, and even in sudden death, individuals there just wondering, is there anything that can be done? Even as attempts are made to revive individuals. I've been there in the case where individuals are expected to die. It's been an elongated process. And even at the last moment, when they take their last breath and they close their eyes and they stop breathing, there's that anticipation is, are they going to take another breath? Are they going to? So why would it not be out of the ordinary for Jairus to say, well, maybe. They've said a lot of incredible things about him. Just maybe. Maybe he can bring her back. And again, no statement in any of this. He gets to the house, and in verse 37, there's an exclusion. He permitted no one to follow him, and I had forgotten this. We were talking in the teen class during VBS about the fact that Jesus had a special relationship with Peter, James, and John, and that they got some experiences that the other 9 didn't get. I mean, there are a lot of different ways to look at that. Some individuals look at it, well, wait a minute, that's Jesus playing favorites. I don't get it. He had a special relationship with them. Jesus was human. I think many of us have individuals that we're closer to than others. There are significant likes and dislikes. Sometimes there are people that we seem to have an easier time having a relationship with than others. And that the Son of God can have a best friend. I mean, I'll actually go out on and say, I think Peter, James, and John. I know John himself in the letter that he writes says, the one whom Jesus loved. Not that that's not ever said about the other disciples. John 13 says he loved them all because of the way he treated them. But Peter, James, and John, they get to go to the Mount of Transfiguration with him and see Moses and Elijah. How cool is that? Can you imagine the envy that was in the rest of the guys when they go back? Yes, sir, we got us all. And Bartholomew goes, he didn't take me. I mean, I don't know if that's causes some of the tension that comes up between the disciples. But he takes Peter, James, John, come to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and he saw a tumult and those who wept and wailed loudly. When he came in, he said to them, I love what Jesus says here. It's one of those things that only Jesus could get away with saying. There's just been the death of a young girl at this house. I don't get that it's an elongated kind of thing. It's happened, and the tumult, those who wept and wailed loudly. They're in tears, they're crying, they're in distress, they're saying, why in the world does this happen? It's all of those emotions that you go through when someone dies, and Jesus walks up and says, why make this commotion and weep? Well, because we're hurting. Because we've had an incredible loss here. Don't you understand what's going on here? And when Jesus says the next thing that he says, the child is not dead but sleeping. And that's when they lose it. It says they ridiculed him. But when he had put them all outside, he took the father and the mother of the child and those who were with him, Peter, James, and John, and entered where the child was laying. nobody that didn't believe was allowed back in the room. Now, it's hard because I tried to figure out chronologically. When you look back, this is one of the first moments. This is most likely, chronologically, prior to the raising of Lazarus. So this is the first moment when Jesus steps into a situation that is the most impossible situation yet that he's faced. I mean, in reality, it's not more impossible from a God point of view than healing someone who's blind, or the leper that he's already cleansed earlier on in Mark's account of the individual who had one of the most dreaded diseases, was headed toward death. Jesus touches him, his leprosy is gone, he's totally cleansed. But this is death. This is the worst case scenario. Jesus goes inside. And when you figure one individual has kind of said this thought, it says, don't believe what you hear, don't believe what you know, don't believe what you see, just trust me. Has there ever been a moment in your life when you got to the point that all the facts pointed, this is not going to be good? All the analysis, all the tests, the audience that's involved says there is no hope. See, that's where death takes you. That's why that on more than one occasion when Jesus would step into these situations, I said it last week, I'll say it again, he forever changed. It's not a euphemism that he uses. When he says, and he looked at them and said, she's sleeping. Because from Jesus' perspective, that's all it was. The one who knew one day he would stand toe-to-toe with Satan. And because of the accomplishments through the trust that he had in his Father, he'd be able to tell Satan, you can't keep me here. That was in Hades. You can't. My Father has the keys. And he steps into this room, into this house where there is so much pain, there is so much loss. He took the child by the hand. And the thought of that. The unfortunate numbers of time I've been in a situation that I've taken the hand of the one that has just passed. And with the family there, saying goodbye. And that was the anticipation of this moment. It's over. But folks, that's one of the differences when you spend time with Jesus. It's never over till he says what he needs to say. Here's where it's really interesting. When he says what he says, is a translation from Talitha Kumi, which is translated, little girl, I say to you, arise. Immediately the girl arose and walked, for she was 12 years of age. And they were overcome with great amazement. Now here, we'll get to verse 43 in a minute. It still confuses me in the text. He's gone in, just him. I don't know other than what the scripture says. I don't know what the story he gets him. But when at that moment, can you imagine Jairus, his face, and Mrs. Jairus, don't know her name. Can you even for a moment start to contemplate what they felt? It's because the only one who can did. Now that same promise, that same power Jesus gives us. And then in verse 43, he commanded them strictly that no one should know it. And then said that some should be given her to eat. I find that interesting. She's hungry. But don't tell anybody. Oh, Jesus, really? How are we going to keep this quiet? If there's ever been a confusing passage of Scripture to me, that's one of them. Is Jesus that phenomenally humble? Is there some sort of tongue-in-cheek thing that he's saying, don't let anybody know about this, because going all the way back to the other time, my time has not yet come. If this gets out, it's just going to be crazier than it already is. I don't know. I just know this. They can't help share what he's done. I mean, it's already been told. Jairus' servant goes out. She's dead. She's going to walk back out of the house. When you think about what Jesus does there, let's go ahead and advance it to the next one, Brett. The supply of our need will only be found in Jesus. He is the only person that can do things no one else can do for us. Not only that, I invite you to do what Jairus did so long ago. If you look back all the way to the initial moment, come and lay your hands on her that she may be healed, and she will live. Not might. See, something I didn't mention early on, I don't have any doubt whatsoever in my mind that Jairus believed that Jesus could do what Jairus wanted him to do. And that's heal his little girl. That's why he took the risk that he took. Jesus can take the impossible in situation and turn it into something His power and glory. Now, and that's where it differs with us today. Because I'm not going to... Could God bring somebody back from the dead today? No doubt. If He chose to do that. Could God bring someone's sight totally back? Could He work? For whatever reason, and this is my disclaimer, He doesn't work the same way today as He worked then, and that's by His choice. 1 Corinthians 13, we don't have time to go there, kind of lends it to that fact. There are a lot of things that are going to stop that are happening now. The reason they happen now is to create the faith and the belief. In fact, the end of John, as we've been looking at on Sunday mornings, these are written that you might believe. So my question to you tonight is, do you believe that Jesus raised Jairus' daughter? Because if you do, then you have a responsibility. You've got to trust Him too. So no matter your situation, you've got to trust that He's going to deliver you in that situation. Now, understand this, because when I say that, you go, oh, so He's going to make everything better. That's not what I said. He's going to deliver you. But it may be very much the same way as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as they stood before Nebuchadnezzar and said, He can, but even if He doesn't, He's still God. Because it's in that moment when you say, I know God can deliver me, but it may be His choice to deliver me differently. It may not be deliverance here. It may be ultimate deliverance, eternal deliverance. Because see, that's the most important thing no matter what. Because in Matthew 10, Jesus said, don't just fear Him who can destroy the body, but fear Him who is able to destroy both body and soul in hell. See, my relationship with God is of primary importance. Nothing gets in the way of that. See, Jairus' daughter's situation allowed him to finally see Jesus for who He really was. What is it going to take for us to finally see Jesus? And to finally get that He's everything He ever claimed to be? And no matter what I'm going through, no matter where I am, no matter what I'm dealing with, He can and will deliver me. Period. So tonight maybe you need to come to His feet. And you need to humble yourself and say, Lord, it's time for you to lay your hands on me. Make me the person that you know I can be. Do with my life what you need for me to do. Let me make the difference that you need me to make. Maybe it's initial obedience, penitent faith, confession of Jesus Lord, and baptism. Maybe it's just a rededication. Maybe that's something just between you and God. He knows where you are. He knows what you're doing, what you're not doing, what you're dealing with. You can share that with Him privately. If it's something that you're tired of dealing with by yourself, you've dealt with it long enough, and it's time for you to let brothers and sisters know who can pray with you and can encourage you and maybe even offer some advice as to how to deal with it in a better way. That's why we have this moment. See, back in 1871, as Horatio went across that spot, he could have made a lot of different choices. There could have been so much anger. There could have been so much. But sometimes you got to understand that the person behind the storm knows better than you do. So as we sing this song tonight, if we can help in any way, that's why we're here. Would you come as we stand and sing?